Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly fascinating, the May 2026 State Forecast Update from UHERO, the University of Hawaii Economic Research Organization. We're going to explore what is basically a masterclass in macroeconomic interconnectedness. This report perfectly captures the macro to micro ripple effect. It shows us exactly how a geopolitical crisis on the complete opposite side of the planet can reach all the way across the Pacific to hit local wallets. It's honestly an incredible case study in just how deeply tied our everyday lives are to this super fragile web of global events.
Right out of the gate, the authors frame the situation with a stark, pretty ominous warning. War brings more stormy weather to Hawaii. It's kind of jarring, right? I mean, we usually associate Hawaii with a tranquil, tropical paradise. But here, the executive summary uses that imagery to brace us for the harsh reality of global conflict. It perfectly sets the stage for an economy being battered not by physical weather, but by a massive geopolitical storm brewing thousands of miles away.
To truly grasp what this means, we've got to bring this abstract geopolitical shock down to earth, right into immediate, everyday financial pain. Just think about the number 566. That was the staggering statewide average price for a single gallon of gasoline at the time this report was written. Suddenly, a conflict in the Middle East isn't just some headline on the evening news. It is a very real, very heavy tax on every single person just trying to drive to work, drop their kids off at school, or get goods delivered across the islands.
And the thing is, this burden is falling on an island state that's already exhausted. Hawaii's beautiful landscape is still actively recovering from the devastating Maui wildfires, not to mention the severe March Kona low storms that really battered the local infrastructure. The local economy was just starting to find its footing again, and now it's being forced to face this massive, invisible global storm that threatens to just undo so much of that hard-fought progress.
Okay, let's rewind to the start of 2026 to trace exactly how this all cascaded. At first, the U.S. economic outlook was actually looking up. Retroactive federal tax cuts were planned to boost disposable income and get people spending. But then, in the spring, the war on Iran violently disrupted global oil flows. This caused jet fuel prices to literally double, and as a direct result of that, Honolulu inflation was projected to shoot up to 4.1% for the year. It's a textbook example of an anticipated domestic economic boost getting completely derailed by a sudden, unforeseen global crisis.
The sheer velocity of that derailment it's staggering. The sudden, aggressive vertical spike in the global price of crude oil created the worst disruption we've seen in half a century. It absolutely wreaked havoc on global energy supplies. And, as you'd expect, when that global price shoots upward, the real-world consequence for consumers follows right on its heels, sending average regular gasoline prices completely off the charts.
So, we're left with this fascinating, though definitely frustrating, tug-of-war. On one side, you have macro hopes. The optimism of federal policy, AI capacity investments, and all that initial momentum we had heading into 2026. But on the other side, micro-realities take over. The harsh truth is that surging inflation and 20 to 25% higher trans-Pacific airfares are just completely eating away at consumers' disposable income. The gains from those federal tax cuts are almost entirely wiped out because it simply costs so much more to live, work, and travel.
Which brings us to a really crucial puzzle for the state's economic engine. With the pandemic firmly in the rearview mirror, we have to ask, why are fewer international tourists coming to Hawaii? The state relies so heavily on tourism, yet the numbers are softening in key international demographics. To figure that out, we have to pivot from the global oil shock directly into its devastating impact on Hawaii's main industry.
The answer actually lies in the crushing collapse of the Japanese yen's purchasing power. With the real relative price-adjusted exchange rate on this steep downward trajectory, Japanese tourists are facing the absolute weakest currency purchasing power they've seen in decades. Think about it. When your money suddenly buys a fraction of what it used to, booking a trans-Pacific vacation to a premium destination like Hawaii becomes incredibly difficult to justify.
But, it's not just the exchange rate. It's the brutal, unavoidable math of modern travel. Because oil prices spiked, jet fuel prices essentially doubled. Airlines operate on notoriously tight margins, so what do? They pass the buck directly to the consumer, rapidly pushing trans-Pacific airfares up by 20 to 25%. When a flight to the islands costs a quarter more than it did just last year, especially when you combine that with domestic trade tensions, it naturally causes Canadian and U.S. arrivals to stagnate or drop off too.
And these cascading effects translate directly into some pretty stagnant forecast data. Total air arrivals are basically flatlining, forecast to go from 9.64 million in 2025
to just 9.84 million in 2026. U.S. visitors and Japanese visitors are barely inching upward. This vital tourism sector, which Hawaii heavily relies upon, is managing a meager 2% crawl for the entire year, and honestly, it's expected to slow down even further in 2027.
And while fewer tourists are showing up, the locals are really feeling the squeeze at home. Now, the number $100 might not sound like a huge deal in a vacuum, but the UHERO report estimates the typical Hawaii household is now paying an extra $100 every single month just to cover additional energy costs. That's $1,200 a year. That is enough to wipe out a family's entire holiday budget or their emergency savings, siphoned straight out of their pockets month after month just to keep the lights on and the cars running.
This loss of disposable income hits even harder when you consider the terrifying gap between home prices and local affordability across the islands. If you imagine a zero line representing equilibrium, where median income actually matches median home prices, we instead see costs soaring hundreds of thousands of dollars out of reach. It perfectly maps the emotional toll of the housing crisis, showing prices that have become completely and utterly detached from what local incomes can realistically afford.
To really hammer home the sheer unaffordability of paradise, just look at the Honolulu data for 2026. A median single-family home sits stubbornly near the $1.18 million mark. I mean, even a median condo is over $500,000. When you're paying that much just to keep a roof over your head, an extra $100 a month for gas feels like a particularly cruel joke. And remember, this is all happening amidst soaring insurance premiums, which have already jumped 13% since the Maui wildfires and are likely to climb even higher.
Okay, so pause for a second. With soaring inflation, a massive housing affordability crisis, and a stalling tourism engine dragging down the state's main source of revenue, why isn't the economy completely crashing? It really seems like all the ingredients for a severe recession are right there, yet the UHERO forecast says an outright contraction remains unlikely. So what exactly is holding this all together?
Well, it turns out there are a few really powerful economic buffers acting like lifeboats for the labor market right now. While tourism is faltering, construction is actually a genuine bright spot. We're seeing job growth in construction ranging from over 2% on Oahu to nearly 6% in Maui County. Add in some large, lucrative federal contracts and massive public works, like the $4 billion new Aloha Stadium Entertainment District, and you've got heavy construction and government spending basically keeping the state's economic head above water.
And then there's this deeply ironic economic counterforce at play. A massive, unprecedented spike in transfer payments is actively propping up the numbers. Totally tragic circumstances, the devastating wildfires, have ironically generated a huge temporary influx of capital into the local economy through compensation and relief funds.
To put a specific figure on that, the report estimates that $550 million in Maui wildfire settlement payouts will reach households in 2026. This incredible dollar amount is essentially injecting lifeblood into the state's economic data. Honestly, without this $500 million influx, the overall state income growth for 2026 would look significantly worse. It is a really sobering reality that a disaster recovery payout is actively preventing a broader economic collapse on paper.
When we pull all of these threads together, we arrive at the core thesis of this explainer. Hawaii is facing a literal triple threat. The local economy is being forced to absorb high tariffs impacting trade, reduced immigration stunting labor force growth, and the worst global oil disruption in 50 years, all at the exact same time. It's truly incredible to marvel at the heavy cumulative burden this localized island economy is being forced to shoulder all at once.
And you can clearly see the weight of that burden in the bottom line numbers. The Hawaii real GDP growth forecast shows a dramatic plunge. Back in 2025, growth was a relatively healthy 3.3%. But for 2026, it plummets to just 1.0%, before only slightly recovering to 1.3% in 2027. This dramatic drop proves just how violently global supply-side shocks, like an oil crisis half a world away, can suddenly and drastically stall local economic momentum.
Which leaves us with this final, really vital question. How long can a localized island economy actually withstand the weight of massive global geopolitical shocks? The economic lifeboats of construction and relief funds are keeping Hawaii afloat for now, for sure. But if the conflict persists and oil prices remain sky high, the UHERO forecast warns a recession might be unavoidable. It really makes you ponder the fragile interconnectedness of our modern world. Anyway, thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep exploring, and I'll see you next time.